kind of reflective today, kind of quiet in my heart. It's a big day for me in a faith-filled way, in a sad kind of way. My mom passed on January 29th, which is tomorrow. So I'm thinking of my mom, for me, that was the last person who loved me unconditionally isn't here anymore. Everyone else has some critique of me. She just thought I was all that. And so that's hard. I don't think I've been the same since. And I think for 2 years after that, because I just always remember my homilies, and I think for 2 years after that, I didn't do any homilies at a funeral that I didn't just read the notes. I just couldn't. I was lost. And still am in some ways. But also, yesterday, my spiritual director died, Monsignor Dan Trapp. He was just as good as they get. He guided me a lot. I quote him a lot. He very much made me who I am. Once I was in a class at the seminary my first year. You got to understand, I'm a Protestant convert. I'm married. I have 3 children. I now have 6 grandchildren. And I'm in a seminary where, of course, no one else is married, no one else has children, and that sort of thing. And I'm a bit lost. And so I'm in a Latin class. I just wanted to learn Latin. It seemed like if you're Catholic, why not learn Latin? There was a guy in my class who was Vietnamese. Can you imagine this? The class was taught in English, but it was Latin class. And so he was Vietnamese. I don't know what he had to transfer through what languages to get these. We had to translate English into Latin and Latin into English sentences, but he had to do it with a mind that thought in Vietnamese. And so he always watched. We had a group of us, and he always watched us, and he would be looking to see what we had. He would count to see when he was going to have to translate a sentence. And then he knew, oh, I got number 16. What did you guys get for that one? And so we'd laugh, and we'd show him, and we'd give him funny translations, and especially Rob Yurkovich, God love him, a big, huge, up north, Upper Peninsula, just Czech or whatever he was just one of those big guys, and tu es homo, which is you are a man. But Rob would tell him it means you are a homo. And so we laughed a lot in the class. And actually we got rebuked. The teacher of the class, I forget his name, which is good, because then I don't have to think ill of him. He called us out midway through the class. We would have a coffee break, and he called us out. And he said he was rebuking us for being too jovial, for laughing too much in Latin class. And it was a coffee break, and I'm like 40-some years old in seminary. I'm like an old man to these guys. And I'm thinking, well, you keep rebuking everybody. I'm going to go get coffee. And Carolyn Kitts, who was one of us getting rebuked 10 years later, we run into each other, and she goes, I remember we were getting yelled at, and you just walked away and went and got coffee. Why did you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. There was coffee, and I would think the opposite. If there was coffee, why did you stay and get yelled at? And life is easier when you're older and don't care. But anyways, that was my first year in seminary, and everybody, all the students, all the teachers, wrote evaluations on us. And this teacher wrote a negative evaluation on me, and here's what it said. Father Steve might be too jovial. And I'm like, okay. I mean, it's true. But is that a problem? So I went to my spiritual director, Dan Trapp, Father Trapp at the time, and I said, is this a problem? And he goes, oh, God knows we don't need more jovial priests. And I said, I'm taking it, it's not a problem, right? But he guided me in other ways. When I had spiritual experiences that were profound, he would be the only one I would tell about them, and he would guide me through those and let me know they were okay. I remember learning how to do the Mass. He helped me a lot. He said, it's a sacrament of unity. And I'm not judging anybody, because when somebody gets creative when they say the Mass, I always like it. But some people don't. Some people get all edgy. And so he said, it's a sacrament of unity. Just read the words out of the book, and then everyone gets the same thing all the time. You don't have to worry about whether someone likes it or you set someone off or something like that. So I just read the words right out of I don't read them anymore because I've memorized them by now, right? But they're right out of the book. And he guided me to be, just a person who brings unity into the church. And so I say a prayer for Monsignor Dan Trapp. He's just beautiful, beautiful priest. Did a beautiful ministry down in Detroit. So I'm thinking of him a lot. I'm thinking of my mom a lot. Others, you probably knew Bill Luger? Father Bill Luger went home a couple days ago. You knew Father Bill Luger well, too. And so there is a homily in here somewhere. Oh, this is weird. You want to hear good news? How many of you, I'm looking at you gray hairs more than anyone. How many of you just don't ever sleep through the night? That's me. That's me, ever. Not ever. And I don't even have to set the alarm anymore. The one that's closest to time to getting up, when I get up, I just stay up. I don't even set the alarm. So last night, I slept through 8 solid hours. And I'm mid-dream, and it's a very vivid dream. And all of a sudden, loud as day, Cindy yells at me, Stephen, get up. And so I jump up, and I look, and she's not there. She's still in bed, sleeping away. I don't know how she yelled at me to get up. But I told you last week, I don't need a conscience. I got a wife. And I don't need an alarm either. And she doesn't even have to be up. Isn't that weird? She just yelled at me, get up. I sat up, and I looked around, and I looked at the clock, and I got up. So this is a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day. So let me just say a short homily, since I should. Moses said that God's going to raise up a prophet like me. Listen to him. And in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is that person. So in the Gospel of Mark, which the deacon read out of today, Jesus isn't the great prophet. Jesus is the Son of God, okay? And so Mark wants you to know that. At the very beginning of the Gospel of Mark, he begins the Gospel in verse 1, chapter 1, the beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And then he ends his Gospel with Jesus dead on the cross, and the centurion says, surely this man was the Son of God. And every story in between the first verse and the last, Mark's telling us, having somebody tell us that Jesus is the Son of God. Today, as it turns out, it's a demon-possessed man. A demon's telling us that. He's the Holy One of God. So Mark wants you to know that Jesus is the Son of God. Luke, he's the great prophet. So Luke focuses on the sense of hearing. People were listening to Jesus. Why? Because that's what you do when a prophet speaks. You listen to him. Even Moses said, a great prophet like me, listen to him. And so our antiphon for the gospel was, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. So that's a truth that we want to take home. But Mark is a little more profound than that, only in the sense that we already heard that last week, listen to God, and we want to have ears that hear and hearts that are open. But Mark tells us that Jesus, it's his first time into the synagogue. He goes in and he does a reading and he starts to talk, and every Jewish man had that right to do that. So he's not doing anything strange. So he goes into the synagogue and he teaches something that's astonishing. They were astonished at his teaching. And you know what Mark does? He doesn't even tell us what he taught. I'm like, what'd he teach? You know? If he gets up out of the grave, I want to know his first words, right? And if he starts preaching, I want to know his first words. What did he think was important enough to begin his whole ministry with? What were his words? Mark doesn't care. Because it's not about the teaching. It's about the teacher. It's all about Jesus for Mark. He's the Son of God. And he taught as one having authority. Now, there were a lot of rabbis in the time of Jesus, and some people called him rabbi. And a rabbi's authority was based on their teacher. They would say, well, this was my teacher, and that's why I have authority to teach. But it wasn't just that. It was like, my authority is based on this person was my teacher, and this person was their teacher, and this person was their teacher, all the way back to, and their teacher was Moses, and his teacher was God. Okay? That's how a rabbi had authority. Jesus didn't do any of that. Why? Because Jesus didn't receive his teaching from Moses. Jesus didn't even receive his teaching in a prophetic way. Jesus was the teaching. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus didn't need to base his authority on anything except his own being. Authority, exousia in Greek, ousia just means being. Your nature, your being. And ex is coming out of. Ex, out of. So out of his own being, he taught. He was the Word of God. And so Mark wasn't interested in what he taught so much as him and everything about him. What he did, what he taught, everything Mark gives us. But he taught an astonishing teaching. And Mark doesn't even tell us what it is. Isn't that amazing? So I used to tell, I was sitting next to a server of mine. His name was LeBlanc. I forget his name. It was probably Matt. And he said, I said, I'm going to ask a question of the congregation. I just want you to know the answer is Jesus. Mark would get that. The answer is always Jesus. And so I went up and I asked the congregation something like a couple years later. I'm like, I'm going to ask you all a question. And that same server's still there, and he yells out, Jesus! And I'm like, you're right. How'd you know? He said, you told me any questions, just say Jesus. And so that's what Mark wants us to know. I'll tell you a story about a teacher. It was her first day really on the job at a new school, a Catholic school. And you guys who went to Catholic school know one truth about Catholic school. If you get there early, you don't get to go in. You don't get to go in until the bell rings. So if you're dropped off early because your parents work, you wait for the bell, and then you get to go in. Well, it was a rainy, blustery January day, and this little boy is just out there just wishing he could be in there. And he sees this young woman coming. It's the teacher. It's her first day. And he says, you can't get in. The doors are locked. And so she goes, oh, and she starts to dig in her purse. And he says to her, oh, you're a teacher. And she's thinking, how does this kid know I'm a teacher? It's my first day here. And she says, how do you know I'm a teacher? And he said, because you have the keys. And she said, that defined my whole career as a teacher. I never forgot that. That's what I based teaching on, that I had the key for so many of these beautiful little lives. And I took my job with that mission in mind. And I think, if you think of the little boy, he did not want to know what she was going to teach that day. All he wanted to know was she had a key. And that's how Mark is. He doesn't really want to know what Jesus was teaching. It's good. He is the key. He's the answer. He's the way. And so really what we want to do is go back to the psalm the response is, if today you hear God's voice. Yeah, that voice is the voice of Jesus. That's God's voice. That's not the voice of a prophet. That's God's voice. So if today you hear God's voice, and you do, it's in there, at the point of resistance for you mostly is where you know most who Jesus is, because that's where you're resisting him. You know he's God, and he's saying forgive, and you're resisting, and you're like, I'm not going to forgive. Or you know he's God, and he says, I have all authority. You go, no, I want to have the authority right now. I'm just going to take control of my life. You know, at that point of resistance is when we know who Jesus is, because we're resisting his authority, him being God. But anyways, if today you hear God's voice in the Mass, in the words of the Mass, and the people around us, in some great spiritual director like Dan Trapp, just in the readings, in your spouse, in your children, harden not your hearts. Just listen for that voice of the Son of God. It's astonishing. It's amazing, okay? And that's our faith, listening to God's voice through the Son of God, our Lord Jesus Christ. And what a wonderful salvation. What a wonderful Redeemer. What a wonderful faith we have.